You are listening to an independent production. All additional audio elements were provided copyright-free and belong to their respective owners. For the ease of our listeners, this specific episode has been broken into 2 parts. You are currently listening to part 2.
All right. So the next slide is it's an overview on how power works in the current iteration in the US, as well as a lot of information on how things work from generation to your house. So we'll start at the power plant. Power plant's a generation facility that generates the power to send to the transmission substation. From the transmission substations, this is the raw 345 kV power that's being pushed out from the power plant into these high voltage transmissions lines. Then it goes to a power substation where it is stepped down to usually 12.4 or 14.4 to go along the power poles and feed the transformer that is on the pole next to your house. Now, that transformer steps that 14.4 or 12.2, 12.7 down to usable levels, which is traditionally a 120, 240 volt, 200 amp circuit.
And we have all these step downs to overcome basically the resistance in the wires themselves and get it across the distance.
Yes, and with most power wires being a specific grade of conductor, like I know for the Texas grid, they primarily use aluminum for its longevity and its ease of transmission for electricity. It's primarily aluminum that we see. And in the transformer itself, that's where the step down occurs. So at the power substation and the transformer drum itself are where those step downs occur. Now, that step down is an application of Ohm's law that allows you to move electricity through specific materials and specific procedures to step it down to what we would know at our outlet as 120, 240. Now,
just so people can understand. So for the community, we're probably not going to be generating the same kind of power that a full power plant would, because we're not concerned with transporting it hundreds of miles away. We're going to have maybe 200 acres to deal with.
No, and you would primarily be using, I believe it's 12 volt to 40 volts stepped up to 120, 240. So you'll never hit that exceedingly hazardous range of like 345 kV.
Just so everybody has an idea of what we're thinking.
Now, that brings us into the other side of the slide where it actually goes into the house diagram with a solar generation setup already pre-installed on the system. As you can see here, you can see the system feed, which comes in from the transformer. And then that system feed feeds both your battery, your housing distribution board, and your power conditioner. So the power conditioner, it's a regulator. What it does is it stabilizes the power for you and conditions it so it is usable, and it is capable of backfeeding into the grid if you are still connected to the grid. You have your solar cell module that's connected via connection box to the power conditioner, and then the housing distribution board typically feeds your 100 volt basically 100 volt appliances and 200 volt appliances. And then you have a power distribution board for the storage system, which is your battery, that has a selected load of basically 100 volt appliances that, according to this, exists on a separate circuit. But for most systems, everything will exist on the same circuit, and the battery will feed into the central disconnect box, and then everything will be powered from there, if that makes sense. Clear as mud?
Yep, clear as mud.
All right, so for the next few slides, I put together a couple of, well, actually 4 total off-grid power examples that we can work through and discuss. And if you have any questions on these 4 slides, please let me know, because these are just based on what I could find and the easier to understand diagrams, because I'm pretty sure nobody wants to read electrician schematics.
They make my brain hurt.
They give me a headache too, and it's about the same headache my finance homework gave me.
They make my brain tingle. Probably we're
Things are
getting
bad enough.
zippity zapped.
So if we want to move on to slides 7 to 10, and we can start with slide 7, which is an off-grid configuration.
Before we begin, a quick question, I guess. How are these easy to connect to a system that is also receiving power from major grid like the state.
So
Oh, yeah.
the off-grid configurations are gotten with the isolation in mind.
Okay.
Now, it's a simple connection if you're doing a state supply grid, because Vermont is on the east grid and a place like, I believe, Washington would be on the west grid, whereas Texas is its own grid because Texas is here. The United States has a total of 3 different grids. You have the east grid, the west grid, and you have the Texas grid. Now, as for the laws that exist between each different grid, I am almost exclusively familiar with Texas, not so much with east and grid, east and west on the legalities, like you are required to hook up to this or you're required to do this. Doesn't matter if you're off grid, so on and so forth. To get on grid with these specific configurations, you would need a feedback cutoff loop, which is a large type breaker that you just kick off when you don't want to be backfeeding into the grid. And you just conduit right over and you're done. So I think all in all, on most of these configurations, we should be able to have them exist on a grid connected system with probably about 6 hours of work tops, and that's just mainly pushing wire.
We don't need to be electrocuting linemen.
Yes, because like I was saying earlier, inverters and transformers will work both ways. So that feedback, like say we're in a power outage like most of Texas was in February. If I am feeding back into the grid with the generation failure, if I'm feeding back in a grid and I have somebody downline, we'd end up with a situation like Broseph was in. Because what may be 120, 240 in my house, keeping my house warm, is all of a sudden 345 kV back through the power substation, back to the transmission lines. And there could be a broken line somewhere that is now energized that nobody had any idea about, because it is next to impossible to lock out, tag out the entire grid for maintenance. We can jumper things and we can bypass, so that way, even if we know that line is dead, if somebody is pushing back power, we can still make it safe to work on. But that still would be an energized line, which requires a major safety concern.
Exactly, and we don't want to be making anybody's lives harder than they need to be.
And like the reason I asked about if we can connect these to an already existing grid is because, if I remember correctly, quite a few episodes ago when we were first doing the podcast, we were talking about getting land. If I remember correctly, this was episode 2. And Vikril, didn't you say something about, requiring power coming to the lot?
Yeah, so a lot of areas, and it's strictly on a town by town or electrical company basis. You're required to have power to the property if you have houses on it, like hooked to the grid. But a lot of times there's no
You're not
laws
required
about.
to use the grid power.
Yeah, you just have to be hooked to it so the electrical company can send you a small bill.
Oh,
See,
okay.
in Texas, like that's one of the major differences in Texas. From what I understand, there is not a requirement for that, because like there was a major grid cleanup not too long ago where a lot of these older abandoned facilities we ended up having to drop the service that we owned to basically lessen the load on the grid, because there was still some passive usage on inactive properties. And that passive usage, well, yes,
Security cameras, emergency lights, etc., still pulls power.
no, it's
Just because
just
it's
a
connected.
circuit. It's just the circuit. And what's funny is most of your appliances also have some kind of passive usage when they're plugged in, but they're not turned on. That passive usage is like, it can be the AC maintaining a ready start. It can be a computer that needs some background power to do something or another. If you turn your fridge all the way down, I mean, even with it turned off, there's still some kind of background usage that occurs.
Like,
Keeping the clock running on your microwave. Making your alarm clock flash 12 because you never learned how to set it.
or you're too lazy.
Well, I mean, what I'm thinking of is kind of like going back to, the incident for the Navy with me. Like, before I even started working on it, I still discharged everything, like all of the capacitors and such. I'm assuming like this is that capacitors and such like that's what's causing the draw just naturally because it's connected.
Well, that, and you also have, like, if for whatever other reason you have an electrician or somebody who loops something, you could potentially have some kind of backfeed that is it's basically self-generating. I've seen that a couple times. You also have, like, there is always a path to ground specifically with a house. So with that path to ground, there is always going to be some kind of referencing energy going through there, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And let me tell you, ungrounded houses are not fun. Try to take a shower, it can get a little sparky.
You don't like your electrically charged shower head?
I
like
wasn't not a big fan of the spicy showers.
I like welding in the shower. I don't know what as somebody who's welded in probably more areas than he probably ever should have.
We're going to put that on a safety brief for later. No welding in the shower.
Armitage, have we even gotten to talking about the configurations yet?
No, we haven't.
We should probably move on to that before we go into a hole again.
Okay. So let's talk about the off-grid configuration that we've got here. This is slide 7. So this is a solar setup. The overlooking explanation of this is a configuration that is set up to primarily exist with solar as a primary power source. This is a solar panel setup with a backup gas generator for power failure in the event of solar loss and battery charges reach 0. So there is a lot to go into with this. Y'all all have a copy of this if we want to go into any specific details here. But what this is completely isolated. It is a solar primary with a fueled kind of generator backup.
Which is always a good thing to have. A backup to the backup.
Yes. Now, there was one thing that I wanted to talk about here, and that was specifically the batteries. So with solar, wind, and just for power storage in general, batteries are going to be required. They can be, from what I've been reading about, they can be lead acid, they can be lithium ion. Don't recommend lithium ion because if they get wet, they go boom.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, I like
lithium
lead acid.
phosphate.
I like lead acid because they're infinitely recyclable.
Yes, and that was
like
one of the
Basically infinitely recyclable.
I like Edison batteries.
Iron oxide, I remember looking deeply into because my father also works in solar generation, and he specifically, like, he really enjoys doing the battery stuff. And a little while ago, he was working with some friends about creating kind of solar power kits. So it's like it would have the solar panels, the electrical stuff, and tools and such, including a iron oxide battery, which is essentially just rusty iron filings and water. And it was set up in a way that, that would be the storage. It would be the power storage, and it may not be as energy dense as lithium ion or lead acid or anything like that, but it was incredibly safe as well.
Safety is going to be the key for long term, and that's one of the options that I would absolutely recommend looking into, because lead acid, you have the hazard of lead being a heavy metal, and you also have the hydrochloric acid that goes with it. Sulfuric acid.
Sorry, I do forklifts, and big industrial lead acid batteries are kind of my bread and butter.
I am so glad you're here because I ran out of coffee.
They make the air taste so good, especially when they get hot.
Right?
So are there any other questions on this specific off-grid configuration?
The iron oxide battery that I was talking about, it's actually called an iron redox flow battery, also known as an iron salt battery. And as I said, it's just iron filings, water, and salt. So it's incredibly, like, you could drink the formula. It's not going to be very tasty at all, but you're not going to die from it. And if a fire breaks out and ruptures the battery... Sorry, go? What?
I'm sorry. I was saying they're designed for large-scale energy storage applications.
Yeah.
So we will see these in like grid stabilization and renewable energy integration as well. So this is really nice.
Yeah.
We also use the Edison batteries up here a lot for cell phone towers. They're easy to get.
I don't know
All right,
about these
so-
batteries.
My question would
No, I
be
don't.
with the batteries and power storage like this, what would we be looking at in terms of amount and storage capacity overall to say the average single unit of living space or a person? Like what's the size and what are the costs that we're looking at for this?
So with a setup like this, specifically with the battery storage, flat out, the kits are not cheap. They average about $3,000 for a single house kit, 3,000 to 5,000. Now that is modular in design. If we did it ourselves, I would have to look at the actual costs, like the iron oxide batteries, because an array of, I believe it's 4 or 5 of these batteries should be enough to power a house, depending on their discharge capabilities and what is running. So, and that's one of my main questions leading into this is what kind of loads are we going to expect? Because that is going to depend on how we design the setup and what kind of inverter we need. Now, you could, I believe the recommended setup is in sequence. In series, I believe, is everything discharging all at once, but in sequence they would discharge sequentially, if I remember that specific section correctly.
Okay.
The
Um,
little bit of research that I've done, I think they do discharge sequentially, like you were saying, Armitage. There's a lot of there's a lot of home battery storages that are being advertised where it is that sequential discharge.
Yeah, the sequential discharge is going to be the longevity of the charge, which is something that is going to be absolutely critical. The other thing that getting into this is there's a lot of rigs that run off of car batteries in Alaska, of all places. The thing is they're running for 6 months out of the year on batteries with a gas generator backup, typically.
And car batteries are like depending on where you get them, the decent ones are going to be around $200 a pop.
Yep. I just replaced the battery on my truck and it was about 245. So they are going up because unfortunately we have to import a majority of the batteries and they are also subject to the tariffs.
So one of
Run.
these kits that you were talking about earlier, though, what would be the average, like just ballpark runtime for a single house?
About 6 hours.
Okay.
That's what I'm seeing on the commercially available kits that I've been seeing range from 6 to 8 hours, kind of ballpark. That's with, let me pull that link back up because I had one that I was looking at not too long.
And that's 16 hours of like peak use. If we're talking you're going to bed, it could probably go 16, 24 hours of that level of use.
Okay, so say if it was in the dead of winter and you had to run a heater to keep yourself from freezing to death.
And you're running a electric heater and all that, then you're going to shorten the runtime.
Well, right.
Dramatically.
I think Silver's trying to get a ballpark of how much that time is being shortened.
Right.
It depends on so many variables in the system.
So the idea that we have right now is that we're going to have the community set up in such a way that each one of these houses has this setup, or are we looking at a larger generation that has a storage capacity that runs off to the different buildings? and stuff?
Ideally, both.
Right. Okay.
I would
Um,
agree, purely because that means every single structure in the community is a battery storage facility as well, which allows extended run times, and you have the collective power supply that you can rely on.
Right.
We
Just,
have a larger setup for
right.
like the community for everything's gone down. We need power now.
Right, and forgive the dark humor here, but the last thing I want is for our folks to get in a position where we're in a middle of a blizzard or we're snowed in and can't get help in, and we're having power issues and end up having to go Donner Party on everyone. We don't need that sort of thing to happen.
I'm going for picnics.
That pass, no.
So
The last time the Northeast had a giant snowstorm, all the states sort of got together and went, Yeah, we're just going to ignore road rules. So you had like bulldozers driving down the freeway.
Well,
I-
I'd
That's
also like to point out the way weather has been recently with
It has been
and
getting more
whether
and
you
more
believe
extreme.
exactly, whether you believe in climate change or not, the fact of the matter is the trend is
It-
showing that we are
it
getting hit by
exists.
more storms, polar vortexes coming down more often. We've gotten we live in a southern state personally, and we've gotten more snow the last 2 years than we have the entire time I've lived here.
Oh, the last 2 years
as
up here,
do
we've
I.
had dramatically less snow.
And it has been chaotic, and that's just putting it mildly.
No, but
So-
I totally understand your concerns. I'm making jokes and being silly because that's how I cope with things.
No, that's
Un-
fine. I appreciate the humor.
I do
Also-
have some numbers for you on this.
oh,
So, numbers time. All right. So, what I'm seeing here is on average, a 10 kilowatt hour battery can typically power essential appliances for about 24 hours with larger capacities, offering us some extended backup power. So, looking at the runtime with a 10 kWh battery, you can expect to power essential appliances for about 24 hours. That's usually your fridge and lighting is what I'm getting here. So at a higher capacity, say a 13.5, you could potentially run your home for about 13 and a half to 16 and a half hours, give or take. The factoring issue on this, the more devices you have on it, the faster the battery is going to drain. Ceramic heaters are infamous for being extremely high power draw. Maybe not usage, but they pull amperage like crazy. So for instances like a power outage in the middle of a blizzard snowstorm, we're going to have problems, particularly with battery storage, because the run times do not extend beyond that day range in general. And if you're running heaters, that is going to be drastically short. So you would have to be able to have a critical backup of some kind that is easily accessible, that you can plan for extreme weather events and prevent, as Silver said, a picnic situation in the middle of the Rocky Mountains trying to go west.
So,
Yeah, so-
speaking of that backup, not necessarily an energy backup, and I know this is straying away from electrical, but going into this real quick, wood fire stoves and such.
Just going to get into that.
How viable would that be in houses?
I have 3 in my house right now.
And
I
you know,
have
if
one
we're
right
So
talking-
over
they
here.
are popular as hell up here, especially wood pellet and just normal wood stoves.
Perfect.
There are positives and negatives to it,
course.
especially if you're trying to get insurance for things. A lot of companies won't touch your house if you have a wood burning stove in there. You have to either have
Really?
it specially set up or it has to be something in a structure that has been grandfathered in, and that's almost countrywide.
There we go.
Really? Because up
'cause-
here, it's
'cause-
usually just given that you have a wood stove in the basement.
Because
And how old is your house?
This one was built in 81.
Okay, well, it could have been built back before the insurance companies cracked down
Hey,
on stuff like that.
Some brand new houses still have wood stoves.
but
Like,
also
it's just a given up here in New England.
guys, also, the majority of the community is going to be new housing, but also they're going to be not. I don't want to say micro houses, but they are going to be smaller houses that probably are going to be heated a lot easier by a wood burning stove or a fuel type stove. Doesn't require electricity.
My
Go ahead.
Uncle Ed lives in kind of rural PA. He has 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, living room, dining room, whole 9 yards. And it's a pretty small house, and he heats it over the winter with coal.
You can still get coal in
furnace.
Vermont and New Hampshire.
Now, if you have a coal burning stove or coal central heat in your house and you burn wood in it, that's a whole nother thing. But
You can't burn wood in a coal stove. It's not designed to handle that.
So
I know this
Is-
is a topic that a lot of people don't have experience with, but living up here, a lot of the new construction houses tend to have wood stoves or pellet stoves in them, and they're set up for one fuel source. So you can't switch up your fuel sources, really.
I think we are also going to be focusing on one type of fuel source because unless the homes are multifamily or like when we were talking in episode 3, I want to say when we're talking about housing, the apartment complexes, the larger buildings, stuff like that, yeah, we could probably use coal stoves, but otherwise, I think the majority of housing is going to be those wood pellet stoves.
I think you should go with wood pellet or just straight up. It's like wood
Yeah.
pellet can get pricey. You got to truck it in via semi-truck. 3 pallets will last you, for your standard 3 bedroom house. 3 or 4 pallets of the stuff will survive you a season. But if you get just wood, you can get wood anywhere. Almost every logging company and stuff.
That's what I'm
just
saying.
dumps it on you.
Wood pellet, wood, something like that. But I think that's going a little bit too far off topic now. Basically, we'll have a backup method to heat the houses that doesn't require electricity and is not going to diminish the
Property value.
Not property value, the Armitage charge time.
Yeah, it would diminish the
Discharge rate.
basically. It would mitigate the issues with the discharge rate.
Thank you.
And the longevity
That's the term
of-
I was looking for.
The longevity of the battery storage itself. With that being said, what slide are we on? We're on 7, right?
I am on slide 7. Yes.
Fantastic. So 8 is more schematic-y. There's 2 setups here. There's one gas with battery storage, and then there's another that's solar with battery storage. That's the kind of electrical diagrams I was talking about that just make your head hurt. This is more of a technical outlook on the aspects of the battery storage with either or. So this is just for information, kind of an overview of what goes into it. Silver, we were talking about the battery array. If you would, at the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, they've got an array here of what looks like to be 14 batteries. So that seems to be kind of the average setup. That's just what I found on the diagram.
It looks like there are multiple groups wired in parallel, but each group has 2 batteries wired in series. It looks to be. They just have it organized a little bit oddly.
Yes. It was a really strange diagram, but for whatever reason, it appears to work, and that all runs central to that. I believe that's called a collector, because that's what the main disconnect runs off of. So that's a little bit more of a technical outlook on kind of the aspects there.
And I assume essentially like this is what the solar panels would be plugged into, or the wind generators or anything. It would go from like the converter or the inverter into that collector to charge the battery.
Essentially.
Okay.
Essentially. And remember, all electricity goes both ways at the same time simultaneously. It's timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly, weird stuff.
And we are not getting into that.
Hey, I have seen the entirety of Doctor Who, and it's still confusing, so yes.
I figured that fit the current scenario.
Yes,
We are not getting into high-level electrical theory.
So, moving on to slide number 7, or slide number 9, I apologize. This is more of the hydroelectric diagram that honestly looks to be more of a near industrial aspect with the pumped hydropower storage. Micro hydropower is probably going to be more of the option because it doesn't rely on a reservoir system and it does not self-feed to a pump, which takes away from the energy that's supplied.
Yeah, we wouldn't. I don't think we could pull the permits to do pumped hydropower.
Long-term planning is kind of where I was going with that. Now, the micro hydro, I believe me and Vikral were talking the other day, and I believe that pretty much sums up what you've got as an alternate power source, correct, Vikral? And what that does is that is a small-scale hydropower generation facility. The example that's used uses a power canal and an intake gate to feed the turbine, which discharges into a nearby river.
Simple enough.
I think this is probably what the majority of our hydroelectric generation would be. Vikral, quick question. How populous are rivers and streams that would be large enough to do something like this on?
So a lot of the stuff you'll find on little properties are creeks, and streams. So we'd have to probably put in a weir to make enough back pressure.
Okay, so we would have to do some building, like small reservoir, essentially.
Like a weir is a little 2 foot tall concrete wall that the water will back up against and flow over. You're not stopping power. You're not damming power.
Not to mention a lot of the stuff that I saw when I was doing research for this rely on a 14.6 foot drop to a 16.8 foot drop to maintain pressure in running water. There is So there is an elevation concern when it comes to hydropower as well.
A lot of the properties we're looking at are on the side of a hill, so that might not be that hard.
Yeah,
Also, a lot
yeah.
of people around here will start at the top of a stream and run a pipe off, and that pipe will go for like 800 to 1,000 feet at a gradual drop into the microhydro unit and then dump back in the stream.
That's actually a really, really good design.
And it's really, really basic. Like, there are people around here
You
using
can build a
washing
lot
machines.
You can build a lot of head with very low grade.
If it's basic and efficient, that's what we like.
Keeping it simple. We'll go to the next one. This is wind generation. This is generally, or slide 10 is wind generation. That covers some wind generator designs or circuit designs. The one thing that I did find that was interesting about wind is like if you're running it off grid, you are going to need a turbine controller. That turbine controller is going to be critical in maintaining the health of the wind turbine and mitigating larger maintenance issues. The other thing that is also on this is there is what is called a dump load that is required. So that dump load dumps off the excess energy to prevent it from overpowering everything else. And so this schematic kind of covers all of this in regarding to wind. Any questions on this one?
So with the dump load, so it's more resistant to changes in load.
So dump loads are resistive elements that dissipate excess electrical energy in the form of heat. So you can use that heat by heating air or water.
Oh.
So it's basically a giant resistor bank.
Okay, so we could probably integrate that into the heating setup that Silver was asking about earlier with like blizzards and such.
I was thinking instead of trying to do it for blizzards, use it for the greenhouse.
There we go.
Because that's going to need to be
There
heated
we go.
24/7, 365.
Yes.
Also would help with supplemental heating for our water heaters in the individual homes.
Multitasking.
Sustainability and longevity.
Yes.
Using everything at our disposal. Don't just let anything go to waste, including energy like this. Anyways, so beyond that, I think...
You're just trying to win brownie points with the girlfriend.
Oh, I don't need to do that. She loves me already. She's obsessed with me, and I'm obsessed with her.
Y'all have a lovely relationship.
The only person I have to win brownie points with is her daughter, which I have a feeling that's going to go pretty easily. Moving on.
Don't jinx yourself now.
All right. So what originated this presentation is I came up with two setups. One, and this is in slide 11, it's community power models. So I have put together two setups that one is purely existing on modular power. The other one exists on a community grid and has the ability to interchange with the national grids if required. So this is one setup is more practical. The other is if I had no budget, unlimited construction time, this is what I would do. So on slide 11, you have the modular power. So modular power consists of portable generation with the ability to expand at will by manufacture or purchase modular components, which is solar, wind, hydro generation, or field generator packs that can be interconnected for community power needs. Modular systems will not rely on a community grid. However, the possibility to interconnect these portable facilities with the community grid would provide an attractive opportunity to expand at will and as needs expand. Modular provides mobility, cost-effective expansion, and can be generally moved with a forklift to work sites, new residential premises, or community premises. The second setup is the permanent option, the community grid. So a community grid provides a similar convenience to power systems that exist in the United States. A community grid will rely heavily on insulated infrastructure, conduit, or overhead installation and will require a full 24/7 staff to maintain. That is one of the major issues with community grids. Community grid is a permanent installation that does not allow for portability or mobility, and it is expensive to maintain and operate. Small grid installations do have some major benefits when done underground with established generation facilities that mitigate weather and hazard concerns. So either or, what I'm hearing and what I've been hearing is we're leaning more toward the modular power end of things with what I would call a disassociated, almost grid type setup where every single structure provides something to the overall community. Whereas the community grid would be more of a centralized generation facility with permanent installations that are facilitated underground to prevent issues with wind and weather. The only other major issue with underground that we would have would be the potential for earthquakes, which I don't think Vermont has any issues with earthquakes. And then
Not
the
frequent.
community grid is also going to require a 24/7 troubleshooting staff, grid monitoring staff, and maintenance staff.
Are we still going to need that staff for the modular grid?
So the modular
Like, to the same
grid
degree.
would be of a lesser degree because the structures themselves providing power to the community, right? So you have, say, a tiny home with a battery bank and solar panels, right? Much less maintenance and monitoring is required. However, the charging or the charge storage, what the brain didn't want to work there for a minute. The charge level will need to be monitored at a community level so that way you can have an accurate ongoing number for, okay, the community is charged this much, and okay, we may need to set up a generator pack to take care of the excess demand, right? Because as with power, you always have peak load seasons. You have basically a spreadsheet that tells you, okay, we're going to expect to hit peak load at this point in time. We're going to need to make sure we have the generation in place to do so. So
And you're trying to generate just enough to meet demand.
yes, it is okay to have a little bit of overage so that way you can charge your batteries. It is not okay to create megawatts of power on a grid that can only handle so many kVs, right?
And we can and we also can't generate too much more on a grid when it's only using so much, because otherwise we run into our own troubles there too.
Yes, we get into the safety brief we did prior, and it's electricity is crazy. Electricity doesn't make sense sometimes, but that is one thing that the rules apply. We don't want to overcharge. We also don't want an undercharge.
Yeah. So with this specific slide, I've mentioned it before, and it sounds like there is a possibility of this idea just being completely shot down. I had an idea of each house would have that modular power system, but then it would be connected in a way where if one house's power system went down, they could borrow from like their neighbors.
Yeah, you want to do a
others.
decentralized grid.
Yeah, it's the co-op model.
So that is possible?
Oh, it's very possible.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure of that, because there were a few times in there that I started wondering, maybe this isn't something that we can do, which is all right. Whether we can do it or not, I still like the modular power system because I think that's going to work so much better for us.
So you remember the Humvees, right? The Humvees, LMTVs, and stuff like that from our time in the armed forces?
Yes.
Slave cables.
Oh!
Slave cables. It would be able to work the same way because the slave cables, we would just connect each one and daisy chain it in series through the community, and everybody would be supplying power to everyone. That is why the modular system is so beneficial, because it allows us to interchange things in the slave system as needed. So
this way, if one guy's renewable source power went down, you could turn that off, turn on the community grid power for his house. He has no interruption in power, and you can work on the solar panels or turbines or whatever.
Ideally, it would work in such a way that everybody is powering everybody.
Just right off the bat.
Just right off the bat, everybody's powering everybody. So that way, no matter what happens, at least someone is providing power somewhere. Plus, you have the battery backups. The battery backups on the tiny homes would help power each other. So in a way, you're making a decentralized battery pack for the community. So instead of having a building or a skid with, hundreds of batteries in it, it's decentralized and on everybody's houses or structures. In addition to whatever modular packs that we have built, like you take a Connex that's fitted with, I guess, the Slave 240 cables, and that Connex is your reserve power. When somebody's power fails, we connect that Connex, connect it to, say I've got a tiny home with an extra outlet for another slave cable. We feed into that outlet because it's direct feed to the community. And now we have the reserve power in addition to the existing good power sources that work everything together, right? So this is not something that we would need to isolate one or the other unless we were doing maintenance. And being able to pull off that slave cable, reconnect it to another house temporarily, and being able to say, okay, turn your batteries off. We're going to replace this panel real quick. We replace the panel, batteries back on, reconnect the slave cables. There you go.
Okay, so it also sounds like we can't just have them connected at all times either, though.
So that is the other thing is you can.
Okay.
However, you're going to run into electric stress on certain components.
Yeah.
Now, the other alternative to this is we hardwire it. And if you hardwire it, as long as there's a central disconnect box for both sides of the house, we should be able to isolate at will. The only problem is that's still going to take away from the generation.
Yeah. So okay.
I love how we're talking about alternate generation, and I'm dealing with it right now.
Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, Vickrell had a oopsie poopsie on his property going. A truck driver got stuck on his property and has, according to him, he thinks it took out one of his power lines, which
So they hired Discount Heavy Truck Towing. I'm not going to say their real name, but they're a pretty shit company.
Yep.
And they just flipped one of the doubles over onto a power pole, trying to pull it out of the mud. It's been raining a lot.
So you're going to get a new power pole at their expense.
Hooray!
Yeah, Power Companies knows my property pretty well.
I wonder why.
Oh, because Google Maps will be like, hey, this is totally a road. And there's big signs up saying not a road, private road, emergency vehicle access only, warning, mud ahead.
Yeah.
And they drive in, they hit the creek, you have to ford through the creek. The trucks go in, and then they get stuck. And it cants up and to the right. So when you start pulling on trailers, they tend to lift the wheels up off the ground and flop on their side.
No.
So it took out the power pole.
All right. So
Okay.
I'm jumping to slide 12 because it sounds like we started talking about these a little bit more already.
Yes. So this is the continuation of that slide. So modular power, this is the pros and cons page. Pros, it's expandable, it's cost effective, it's mobile, it's easy to maintain its setup. You can store power for later use. You can build safety mechanisms into the modular systems, which prevent overvoltage, face-to-ground faults, face-to-face faults, exposed wiring, things like that. The cons with modular power is if you're using fuel generation, it's noisy. Weather may cause severe damage if not planned for. It requires regular maintenance monthly. And if you're using fueled, it may require maintenance daily. Exposed wiring causes immediate hazards and danger. So that is one thing I absolutely will preach to this day. No exposed wires, period.
Agreed.
It may not provide immediate and full power required, and transportation can cause immense amounts of damage in the event of a failure at some point. So instead of just an oopsie poopsie, we replaced the pole, you may end up losing an entire generator setup. You may end up losing an entire modular system. So that is one of the concerns that is built into modular power. Now, the community grid, you have your pros: weather resistant, permanent, built-in safety mechanisms, community funded and owned, reliable and stable power if done correctly. Cons, it's not mobile. Expansion is costly and initial installation costs are very high. Hazards tend to outweigh the costs in a small scale. It requires 24/7 monitoring and maintenance available. Interconnection with grid can be counterintuitive to community goals. Electrical staff will be critical in maintaining the grid. So that is one major concern, is this is very staff heavy.
Yeah.
So those are some pros and cons that are associated with the modular power and the community grid. Now, the next slide is where we get into the numbers game.
Bingo, bango. Let's go to the next.
So this is the estimated costs. This is a loose estimation, and by no means should be taken as the word of the land or word of the law. The costs are effective as of when I sent Vickrell the final draft.
If I remember correctly, that was earlier during this week.
Yes. So this was earlier this week.
So that would be the week ending March 28th.
Yes. So keep in mind, this may already be out of date because being a business major myself, I understand the economy changes rather quickly. So just bear that in mind.
Did Trump announce another few new tariffs or something? He probably did.
I
I've just lost track
hope he
at this
didn't.
point.
Alcohol
Oh.
tariff. It's the last I saw.
Oh my gosh.
This is why my wine fridge is
He's
stocked.
He's going after Pete Hegseth.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough politics. Let's get
So-
back to the presentation.
So yes, and yes, tariffs will have an effect on every single level of this construction project. I hate it. I hate that we're going through this economically, but these costs are expected to rise.
That is why
Romex wire.
That is why we're looking into building this co-op in the first place, because of everything going on economically, among other things.
And believe me, I hope this contribution helps.
I think it is. I think it's very informative, Armitage.
I'm glad that y'all think that. The resources like this are very industry specific, and I hope this has been able to provide something, if not a learning experience for everyone. So this is the estimated cost by section. Modular Romex wire is kind of the bread and butter of what we're going to be getting into with the modular side of things. It is a 3-wire insulated wire. If you've worked on a house, you are familiar with this stuff. It's about $134, give or take, per 250 foot. So if we are wiring things, we need to take distance into mind as well. So generation, this is the actual generator itself. This is not any of the bells and whistles that comes with it. There are kits that are included in this, and those kits can range from just the generator and a power conditioner, or a dump, to a full setup, batteries included, whole 9 yards. Solar can run anywhere from $2,500 to upwards of $12,000, depending on the setup or the kit. Fueled can run $550 upwards to upwards of $3,000, depending on the needs of that what we are purchasing that fuel generator for. Wind, the example for this is a 12,000 watt turbine, can range from $450 to $350. It depends on the wattage you want or need. So,
Of course, all of this is subject to scale.
yes, that is another major caveat on this. This is all subject to the scale that you need. So I took the link that for Vickrell's turbine, and I went for the 5,000 watt version.
Okay.
There is a link. There is a link that is here. It is $1,500 plus shipping. So that is dependent on the hydro setups that we would want. It is a portable turbine, and that was what I was looking at in terms of portability, mobility, things like that for the modular setups. The storage options for these modular setups can be Connex, pallet, portable building. Those vary in price. Sea containers. The inverter also can vary by load and device. Stepping it up from 12 volts, even up to 40 volts. Stepping up to 120 to 40, and so on and so forth. It varies by load and varies by device.
Huh.
Now the community grid, same thing on the Romex side. Here's where we get into the fun part. Schedule 40 is the required conduit because it is electrically rated. We can't run this through PVC. We can't run this through just any old conduit. It needs to be Schedule 40 because if there is a line break somewhere and it starts arcing, you need that safety rating to. It's like PPE for wires. Does that make sense?
Yes. It's
Yeah.
always there protecting, because like if that arcing or that sparking, that arcing is exposed to, like, say, the insulation we're using or the wood foundation or anything like that, boom, fire. House is gone. Possibly people inside, which we don't want.
And we make Chicago look like a plaything, because this stuff,
Like a campfire.
yeah, I mean, this stuff is something that the reason why I say Schedule 40 is required is not only is it legally required, it is to prevent issues that we found out in the past. And as we all know with regulations, something happened somewhere that required this. So at Home Depot, we can get a 2-inch ID 10-foot long conduit piece for about $17.34 per 10 foot. The conduit body, which is going to be required for going into the home itself, is going to be about $14.60 per body. Then you have your load center, which is a 200 amp outdoor rated load center. The Square D models are $235. GE can vary in price. That's why I just included a couple of links there for you to take a look at your leisure. Generation is priced by load requirements of type. For the love of everything, no reactors. I know we had this discussion multiple times. I know Broseph has worked in this capacity. No, there's so much that goes into it.
Here's the thing. With that conversation too, like I'm trying to say that we cannot make a reactor that is small enough. Like I was saying, you can't overload. You can't generate more electricity than you're using too much. Otherwise, you go into your own, like Armitage was saying, the safety brief. We cannot, us as humans are not able to build a reactor small enough to do that. So it's not just the rules and regulations. We just can't do it. We're not physically capable of it.
I concur, and one of the implications that I brought up is we would be the weakest link in a long chain of security surrounding fissile material.
Yep.
Not to mention you have the NRC, you have all of these regulatory bodies, the regulatory wall we would have to go through. I mean,
even before you get the cost, the money, we don't have enough.
Yes.
Yes.
Can I also phrase it another way? Do you guys really want to live with a dozen unmarked plumbers' vans and a Reaper drone above us all the time?
That's exactly what would happen, and I cannot express this enough. My bio dad, he was a plant engineer for a reactor, and let me tell you, the level of lethal security that is required for something like this is not something that we want to even think about touching.
I can't say anything on the security on the civilian side, but I don't think it's anything compared to the security that is required in the military. There are all of the stuff that I've told you about my nuclear experience is the stuff that I am allowed to tell you. There is so many more things. And this was only a 2-year program that I was in. It's
and not to mention, like I worked at brigade level, and we were basically essentially turned into a skiff several times in a row because of the kind of information that was coming through. And no, I don't want to deal with that in my home.
No.
And then just to
love
cap
the
it
idea,
off.
but no.
Just to cap it off, I know
words,
this is... Oh, sorry, Raya.
I'm sorry. So just in other words, gentlemen, it is to where if we are trying to be off grid, the government will be in all of our business. So it's not this is definitely what we do not want as this co-op to, if we were to have a nuclear electricity, the issue would be now we have a whole bunch of people here that we really don't want here due to security purposes.
Yeah.
Not to mention, this would run essentially a parallel structure to what already exists, and we can get into societal implications of that later. That is a long, drawn-out discussion.
We don't have time for that because I think Silver's also needing to go.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
We're already at 2 hours for the stream too. But just to cap that part off, as a funny joke to connect it to Far Cry 5, we don't want the ending of that game either.
Agreed. Okay, so I will peruse the rest of this real quick. Fuel generations are slightly cheaper, however, require 24/7 staff. Wind at a large scale is not cost effective for the community and depends on environmental conditions. Access to water provides hydroelectric options that are reliable unless ice will be a concern. So hydro is always going to be a mainstay of a community-type grid. So with that being said, slide 14, here's the estimated modular development planning. These are just some ideas I came up with to kind of set a plan for stages of, sorry.
No, keep going.
So your initial phase is going to rely on primary power's portable generation. And this, mind you, this is just a setup. This is the landing phase. Secondary power is on-grid power supply. Tertiary power is modular on-site generation, because you're going to begin to work on the modular systems to put in place. That is your initial phase. Your phase 1 is going to be primary power with modular to on-site generation. Secondary power is portable generation. Your tertiary or emergency power is on grid. Primary power in your phase 2 is going to be self-generation and modular power supply. Secondary power is going to be battery arrays and on-site generation. Tertiary and emergency power, modular expansion, and possibly on-grid depending on regulations. So this is just something I slapped together as a staged planning for getting the grid set up.
Yeah. And quick note on the tertiary power with the on-grid and such. Since we were talking about it, since we were talking about modular power and the requiring by New England standards that we have to have power coming into the plot, I'm thinking have essentially one of those giant battery packs, like a iron redox flow battery or something, that is located right next to the community center. That's the big battery backup for the rest of the community if we need it.
That is an excellent idea, and considering most east and west grid conditions tend to be favorable for having that as a stable source of power at all times, that is something that I would absolutely recommend, is continually having a large-scale backup battery grid charging at all times. In the event that there's a failure, we can flip a switch, connect it to the grid, the community grid that's running between from house to house to house to house. And in the event of emergency, we can go ahead and just say, okay, flip the switch, here we go, everybody's power is restored, we're good to go.
Yeah, and that can be located. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Test. There we go. I apologize. My mic went out of sync. And that can be located right next to the community center, where the majority of our
it'll be located within a reasonable distance, because I don't think we want it right at the community center. Not because I plan for things to go sideways and things to go boom, but you plan for things to go boom. So if they do,
bomb
minimum 20 foot.
This is why I suggested an iron redox flow battery, because that thing doesn't go boom. That's the issue. That's the thing. The transformers, on the other hand, those can go boom. Those can be located within a reasonable distance.
Transformer minimum distance needs to be 20 feet from a livable structure, provided there's not a specific regulation that deals with how the transformers should be set away from structures, because transformers are always going to be an explosive source of a source of an explosive and electrical hazard.
It's literally coils of wire, so yeah.
And they're all hot and spicy.
Exactly. Okay, so.
And oily.
With all of that being said, I'm on slide 15, a couple of links for review. It looks like those are just some pricing links that you have right there, Armitage.
Yes, those are some links for review that you can look through at your leisure.
I think I will be posting these on the Discord, along with the on the Discord we have a little bit of an archive for each episode with links to Spotify, links to YouTube. I think I'm going to add these links onto that Discord section as well.
There are also other links that are embedded in the estimated costs section. So, like I said, you are free to use this however you will. These links are just a resource for the community and everybody. And honestly, the educational aspects, I mean, I hope this has provided not an in-depth or technical look, but more of an overview with some technical aspects to everyone. So that way we can see a path from point A to point B.
Yeah. And even then, with it just being an overview, it has been incredibly informative. Armitage, thank you so much for putting it together and being a special guest today.
This has
and
been
doing that.
fantastic.
It has been a little bit
Anytime.
longer
Thank
than
you for having me.
expected, but you know what? That's okay. It's just my own mental sanity when I get to edit this later.
I sincerely
You know,
apologize for the headache.
For your own
That's
sanity,
all right.
you could break it up and make it a two-parter.
I could. I might.
And that way you can do half of it this week, half of it next week, and then you're not trying to do it all at once.
Anyway, everybody, thank you so much for coming and staying. I don't know how many people are still watching. Hold on, there's my mouse. Son of a biscuit. We have 9 viewers right now. Thank you everybody for coming on. If you are listening to the Spotify version or the YouTube version, thank you so much for tuning in. I do apologize for the length, but Armitage, again, thank you so much for coming on and putting all of this together. With that,
Thank you for having me. Electricity can get kind of crazy. But again,
I know.
thank you for having me.
I know personally. I know intimately. So, absolutely. Anyways, I'm going to quick stop it there. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a nice day. Have a great week.